So, welcome everyone to the next Clear Mountain interview. We have Ajahn Achalo here, a senior monastic in Thailand, who are deeply grateful to have with us. Ajahn Achalo was born in Brisbane, Australia in 1972. He developed a keen interest in meditation at the age of 20, and a year later left for Thailand to study Buddhism more intently. After a 2-year period practicing in various centers and monasteries, in 1996, Ajahn Achalo ordained as a Theravada bhikkhu under Ajahn Liam at Wat Nom Papong, the monastery founded by Venerable Ajahn Chah. Although most of his training has taken place in Thailand, Ajahn Achalo has also lived in several international forest monasteries in the Ajahn Chah lineage. During his years of training, he has received personal guidance from many remarkable teachers, among them Longpor Sumedho, Longpor Pasano, Longpor Jayasaro, and Ajahn Kalyano. For most of his bhikkhu life, he is considered Tan Ajahn Anan, abbot of Wat Mapjan, to be his principal mentor. In addition, he has found the Dalai Lama's instruction and example to be of tremendous value. Ajahn Achalo is the founder and abbot of Anandagiri Forest Monastery in Phetchabun, Thailand, a monastery where monastics can be in semi-retreat mode most of the time, rather than having busier periods punctuated by intensive retreats. Ajahn Achalo, along with the resident monastics, the monastery committee, and a kind and generous group of supporters, have gone to a great deal of effort to develop spaces in which the local people and other day guests can come to meditate quietly, surrounded by a beautiful and supportive natural environment. Ajahn Achalo usually teaches one intensive retreat overseas each year and leads a practice-based pilgrimage to India every 2 years. Much of his time, over 3,000 hours and counting, has been spent meditating at Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightened. In addition to his duties as abbot, Ajahn Achalo has authored several books, including 3,000 Hours of Meditation, The Process of Realization, and Recollecting Bodhisattvas as well. Ajahn Achalo, we're delighted to have you with us. Thank you.
Lovely to see you, my two fresh-faced younger brothers.
Thank you. We were going to begin with Ajahn Achalo, or Ajahn Kovillo's questions, if we may.
Okay.
Yeah, Ajahn, just hearing about your biography, it seems like from such an early age, basically you came across meditation and then within a year traveled to Thailand. And then since that time have, been repeatedly going back to India. And I'm just curious about your connection with these two countries. Like what has it been that keeps drawing you back to, well, first initially drawing you to Thailand and then that which draws you back to India repeatedly?
Yeah, so I guess it starts with a feeling that I had in my childhood that Australia wasn't my home. So that was actually something that I did kind of viscerally feel from a fairly young age. And I guess that manifested as, and in a way that was obviously a bit of a painful experience, because there's this sense of not feeling that a place is your home, but then not knowing where is home. But it did manifest it then as a sense of seeking and looking for something. And so that, I guess that feeling of seeking and looking for something also had ramifications in other aspects of my life. So when I was accepted to university, I didn't go because I had a intuitive sense that was not going to be a path that would lead me to where I wanted to go. And I didn't know, though, I didn't know what path I would be on and where I would be going. But I did have a certain determination to find it and a certain openness to exploring different things until I did find it. And so going to Thailand, yeah, I'm probably going to come across as a little bit weird, but anyway, that's the way it is. I probably have to start I think I have to start with my meditation practice. That would make more sense. So I would say the very beginning of my meditation practice was actually lying on the beach in Australia. And Australians tend to spend a lot of time on the beach. And when I was a little child, we didn't know as much as we do now about skin cancer. And so we would lie literally for hours in the sun. And so my sisters were trying to get like full body tans. And when I was a little boy, I just had to wait for them to, left side, right side, front side, back side. And lying there on the sand and listening to the sound of the waves of the Pacific Ocean, and actually kind of going through restlessness and boredom. Like we'd already been for a swim, I'd already wrestled with my brothers, we'd already built sandcastles, we'd already collected shells, and then we were lying on our towels, wondering when our sisters would be finished with their sunbaking. But in just having to be there and go, and kind of something happened in listening to the waves. It's just such a, when the beach where I grew up, we were in rural Australia, and the beach where I grew up, I mean, I think very often we would not have seen anyone else there. It was a very remote, and it's not like that anymore, but it was 40 years ago. And yeah, it's just this vast empty space with the sound of the waves breaking, and there's something about that sound of waves breaking on the ocean that there's no kind of logical pattern there. It's every single moment is changing, and every single wave is different, and the sounds are at different depths and distances and have different tones. And I think my mind would find this space of kind of listening evenly to all of the waves without choosing or discriminating or commenting, and would actually find some fairly spacious mind states. And so that was how I would identify the beginning of my meditation practice. Unfortunately, we ended up having to move from that part of Australia when my father got a new job. We ended up moving to the suburbs and away from the beach. But I do think that experience in childhood fairly frequently had already communicated to a deeper level of the mind that there is mental happiness, or there is mental peace, there is something else other than materialism. And my parents were deeply committed to materialism, and they were often complaining about not having enough money, and we would get into arguments sometimes because my mum wanted me to be a lawyer and my dad wanted me to be a doctor, and they asked me, I think they both recognized that the intelligence was there if I would apply it, but getting me to apply it in that way was a different matter. And so we used to argue, well, what are you going to do with your life? And I said, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I said, I mean, I don't know. And well, why won't you do what we're telling you to do? And I was, some people would consider this very rude. I said to them, if I follow your advice, I'm going to end up like you. And I don't want to be like you. So that was kind of a conversation ender. So what are you going to do? I don't know. And so my father had wanted to go to university, and his father had ended up dying and at a young age from a cerebral enema. What are those things called? Aneurysm. Aneurysm. And yeah, so he hadn't been able to go to university, and he wanted me, parents often do this, he wanted me to fulfill his dream to become university educated. And so I tried to let them down gently by telling them that I deferred the course, but actually I just rejected it outright, and gave myself a year to find the guts to tell them. And I told them I was saving money to go to university the following year. And when the following year came, I had found the courage to tell them, no, I'm not going to university. I'm going to Sydney to study acting. And when I was in Sydney and I was studying acting, I was interested in the process of, what makes a character tick, what makes them be a certain way, why do they experience such emotions, how does one generate that emotion? I was interested in essentially the mind and emotions and conditioning. But when it came to meeting with the agent and seeing all the pictures of the people on the walls, I just had this really strong sense of I don't want to be a product and I don't want to be competing. So then I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was basically working in coffee shops and restaurants. And I did do the Goenka Vipassana retreat. So I had been interested in meditation since I was 15. I learned a white light meditation method in a New Age shop. And the New Age shop was called the Bodhi Tree Bookstore, which was interesting. And this lady had taught me about visualizing white light, putting myself in a white bubble. And so I'd done that. Ever since I'd learned that, I basically did it every day. And if I didn't do it, I kind of felt if I went to school, if I hadn't done it, I felt like something was missing. I hadn't put myself in my white bubble. I hadn't washed my aura. And so I did it religiously. And so the people in the coffee shops where I was working knew that I did this method. And several of them had done a Goenka 10-day retreat. And so they suggested to me, you like meditation, you should do this 10-day retreat. I had no idea at the time it was Buddhism, but that was the beginning of my Buddhist practice, was a 10-day intensive Vipassana retreat with 12 hours of sitting a day. That was how my official Buddhist practice began. And I wanted to run away, but it was so much pain. I mean, hardly ever sat on the floor. My white light meditation had been on a bed. And so it was like 12 hours of sitting on the floor, knee pain, lower back pain, shoulder pain. And it was so far away in the countryside, and my sister dropped me off, and it was before mobile phones. And so running away wasn't really an option. I had to stick it out for 10 days. Fortunately, on day 8, with Mr. Goenkaji's prompting, start again, then I experienced a genuinely peaceful mind state where I felt cool, full, content. And there was after that experience, which may have, I don't know exactly how long it lasted, it may have only lasted 10, 20 or 30 seconds, but it was deeply peaceful compared to my usual state. And there was, what was interesting also about that experience was the recognition that came straight afterwards. There was this sense of, that is what I'm looking for. And it was enormously helpful for me because I had been wondering what I'm going to do with my life. And then the other thing was, Goenkaji talked about dukkha as the characteristic of conditions. And I had been really struggling because, I had friends who were studying acting and singing who were very deeply committed to being ambitious along that path. And I had other people that were just washing dishes, but they were getting university degrees and they were committed to other paths. And I knew for myself that a good job wouldn't make me happy. I just knew that even if I was to study the subjects that were presented to me, and even if I got a good job, I just knew that would not make me happy. And if I had relationships, I knew that if I was in a relationship with beautiful people, even in love, that also wouldn't make me happy. So I was wondering what's wrong with me. Why is having a career and being in love enough for other people? And what's wrong with me that I know that will never be enough? And it was not fair to the other person either, because they're going to be looking at you thinking like, I can't make him happy. And it's a horrible. And in hindsight now, I think this is the result of past life practice. I think past life practice is going to manifest as weariness and recognizing dukkha more quickly. This is actually how wisdom, I think, manifests, is you see the futility and the fleeting nature of sensual pleasure faster. And you kind of intuitively know it's not going to work as a refuge. And so those experiences, as a bit of a preface, were orienting my kind of consciousness to be willing to take some bigger leaps. And so one night I was I had to mop the floor at the vegan restaurant vegan macrobiotic restaurant where I worked. I had to mop the floor and yeah, the whole scene, yoga and yeah, which I'm grateful for. I was after I mopped the floor, I walked out onto the footpath, and I don't know why, and I think this is past life imprints as well. Like, I did not believe in a creator God, but I did believe in angels. And at that stage, I did not yet believe in hell either. But I did believe that there were benevolent beings in heaven realms who may help. And I don't know where that view came from. My parents didn't allow me to go to church, so I didn't get it from my childhood. And so I walked out onto the footpath and I looked to the sky and I made, I guess, what we would call an adhitthana. I looked to the sky and I said, I admit that I don't know the true path to happiness. But if you show me, and I was talking to the invisible beings in the sky, if you send me a sign, I promise that I will follow. Show me the true path to peace and happiness. Now, I had already had a daily meditation practice at that point, but I didn't have a lifestyle that had meaning yet. And I wasn't completely convinced about the precepts yet. Having been born in Australia and living in inner city Sydney, I had taken on that daily meditation was helpful, but I wasn't yet completely convinced that, those rules. That came later. And so anyway, I think there's a few things there. One is, I was very sincere. I really meant it, like with every fiber of my being and to the bones. I really meant it. I think that's an important factor. I think another important factor is merits from past lives, because within a few days, interesting things started happening. So I had no kind of strong feeling about Thailand until that point. I think one friend had been and had a good experience. So anyway, somebody left their Lonely Planet Guide to Thailand on the bench of the restaurant where I worked a few days later. And I picked up that book and I just started to read the introduction, and I noticed that it said that Thailand was a 95% Buddhist country. And I had been doing this Vipassana meditation, Goenka style, for about a year then. And I knew it was a Buddhist method. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I just that much got me thinking, maybe I should travel. Maybe it's time to go overseas. I hadn't been overseas at the time. And so the next day, the person who owned the book came back and wanted the book back. But it was the thin end of the wedge. Another week later, it was payday. In those days, we got cash in an envelope. And I opened up my wallet, and there was a strange coin in there. And I asked my friend, it actually had cheddies on it and the Thai king. And I asked my friend, what is this? And I can't remember if it was 1 baht or 5 baht or 10 baht, but she said, that's Thai baht, that's Thai money. And this time, the hairs on my arms went up in a kind of a, Twilight Zone. And then I can't remember exactly how many days later, but another curious thing happened. I had noticed those two things because, I was looking for signs. I'd asked for signs, so I was interpreting things as signs. And, but, it's a kind of an Asian thing to do, isn't it? To be making prayers and invocations and asking for omens. And anyway, so I used to have to clean the fryer in the restaurant where I worked, and once a week. and I used to have to drain the oil out of the fryer. Now, it was a Japanese-inspired restaurant. The fryer was from Germany, Dorf, I believe. And there was this piece of galvanized metal that I used to have to screw onto the pipe to release the oil. And it had one word on it I'd never noticed. And this night I was putting this galvanized pipe on the fryer, and the word said, Thailand. Now, why there was a piece of galvanized pipe from Thailand in a macrobiotic vegan restaurant in Australia, I don't know, because, Australia has its own metal producing companies. But I stood up and I said, that's it. I'm going to Thailand within 10 weeks.
Mm.
And a couple of weeks before I left, I had a ticket, I had a passport, and I didn't have any money. So I had to sell my Turkish rug, my mountain bike, my computer, my bed to get $1,000. And which, 30, 25, 27 years ago was a significant sum. And literally 3 days before I left, I think it was, a Canadian backpacker came into the restaurant asking for a job. And she asked, is there a job here? And I said, well, there may be, because I'm just about to leave. She said, where are you going? I said, Thailand. She says, why are you going? I said, well, I want to go to the beach. It was coming up to winter. I said, I want to go to the beach. I hate winter. And I'm interested in meditation. And she said the most fascinating thing. She says, I just came from Thailand yesterday. And there's a meditation center on a tropical island with the view of the sea. And I'm like, well, this was before Google. So I asked her, could you please write that down? That's how we used to do things in the old days. She used to write a note on a piece of paper and store it away in my wallet. It just so happened that meditation center had two English-speaking meditation teachers, an American man and an Australian woman, who had been teaching backpackers 10-day retreats. And I know my story's going on a bit, but I'll try to make it a bit more condensed. Yeah, so they were teaching reflective meditations and samatha practices as well as the Goenka method, and this was enormously helpful. But the environment was helpful too. Like, I don't think I could have, essentially I lived in that meditation center for 5 out of 9 months. Now, I don't think that would have been possible for the sensual, restless man that I was. I don't think I could have done that in Australia. It was a combination of nice curries, beautiful storm clouds blowing in over the Gulf of Thailand Sea, coconut palms swaying in the breeze, funny nuns. I used to peel the coconuts for the nuns, and they used to kind of spank me. I mean, they're in their 70s. And it was just a combination of, and that she was Australian, Rosemary was Australian. There was a kind of a resonance with that. And these people had studied with a good number of teachers in Thailand and had kind of condensed the teachings into a retreat format where they were teaching metta meditation and death reflection and the law of karma, recognizing one's good fortune, all sorts of things that really helped me to develop my reflective faculty and to understand that mind states could be changed and cultivated and developed and abandoned. They really helped me learn that the mind is a malleable thing that can be cultivated. And that, again, I wasn't convinced about the precepts yet, but when I went to do my visa run and I broke one or two of them, I had to notice that my mind, you're in the meditation center, you can't break the precepts, and got to meditate twice a day. And they had this situation where you would sit one of their retreats and then help serve in another retreat, and then sit a retreat and then help serve. So it's a nice combination. And I would notice when I broke the precepts and came back that my mind was more dull and less happy. And, I was observant enough to notice that begin to see the way that kilesas lie to you. If you just do this once, you'll feel better. You can do it. It's okay. And actually, that thought's occurring within a certain amount of clarity and spaciousness. And then when you go and you break the rule, the clarity and the spaciousness is gone, and the mind isn't happier. And I did that a few times. I really began to notice. I'm like, gosh, it looks like the Buddha might have actually known what he was talking about when he recommended the 5 precepts. And so I begrudgingly took on that part of the program too. And so it was there that from there I went back to Australia because my money ran out. And interesting things continued to happen. I was waking up in the morning already weeping. That's how much I missed Thailand. I was like, pre-consciously, tears were already there was this kind of grief about, because I remember going for a jog on Koh Phangan Island, and I was looking out, I was standing on this hill and I was looking out into the Gulf of Thailand, and it kind of hit me viscerally in my body. It's like, oh, this feels like home. And it was the first time I'd had that experience in this world. And I don't think I could speak a word of Thai yet. And so, there was that recognition. And then coming back to Sydney, there was this real sense of this isn't my place. And, there's wonderful things about Australia, and there's things that I still miss, but I guess karmic affinity. So I started massaging people at the hospice. I was doing the Buddhist layman kind of, contemplating death and dying, volunteering at the hospice, back at the vegan cafe, and redecorated my studio apartment with a Buddhist theme. And some interesting things began to happen. I had a friend who was a taxi driver, and he says, you've really changed, and I want some of whatever it is that happened to you. I want to do that meditation retreat. And he said, I don't want to wait for you to save the money, so I'm offering you the ticket. And then my best friend at the time was studying naturopathy, and she said, I'll rent your apartment. I need a place in town. And so, I would literally set up to do my, Buddhist lifestyle thing. And I was back in Thailand, I think, within 10 weeks. And so, obviously that suggests karma, right? And an interesting thing, I have an interest in Theravada and Mahayana, and an interesting thing happened. I met a man at this meditation center back on Koh Phangan Island, and he'd just been to Wat Nanachat. He was a German man. And like I said, we didn't have Google yet. I had no idea, even though I'd already spent 9 months in Asia, that there was a monastery for English-speaking people in Ubon Ratchathani. He told me that. And then Stephen Rosemary, the teachers, said that there was a monastery in Taiwan where you could live and teach English to the novices. And I had this choice. Do I go to Taiwan and teach English to the novices, or do I go to the forest monastery in Ubon Ratchathani? And I chose Ubon Ratchathani, obviously. And so, I went to Wat Nanachat, and so many things. I'm so grateful that the process went as it did, because if I turned up at Nanachat first without the tropical island in between, I wouldn't have been able to surrender to that level of austerity and discipline. I wouldn't have been able to. There was this, as the Buddha talks about, the wet stick needing to be put on the bank and drying out. So some of that had been happening. My wet stick was partially dried out already by the time I turned up there. And I'd also kind of surrendered to the fact that I wasn't going to be capable of a worldly kind of a lifestyle. And I hadn't worked out yet, how was meditation going to be a part of my life, and how am I going to pay the bills? And so at Wat Nanachat, I felt strangely at home. And it was a very strange experience, because there were many, many things I didn't like. And it felt like the right place. I mean, I'd had that deep intuitive sense of, well, this is where you need to be now. And so, I went. But the fact that you could be a 8 preceptor and then a 10 preceptor and take it step by step, that was, I would not have been able to commit to a 5-year from day one commitment. I wouldn't have. I had to get through I had to get through week by week, So yeah, that would suggest some karmic connection with Thailand, right? That just when I asked for guidance where I needed to be, then I was kind of pointed in the direction of Thailand. And then when I was there, I did feel at home. And when I left it, I missed it. With regards to India, that was the second part of the question, was, you know, when I was in high school, we watched the movie A Passage to India, and we read the book A Passage to India. I think I was 16 in my English class. It was at E.M. Foster, I think. And I was captivated. And the human resources teacher, a lady by the name of Jana Marisava, she, interesting name. She'd been to India, and she came and gave a class a talk about her trip to India, and showed us some, I think she might have had a slideshow. And something really stirred in me. And I was like, yeah, I want to go to India. I want to go to India. And she was encouraging us. She was actually encouraging people to take a gap year, travel, learn a bit about the world before getting the degree. And, I heard that. I liked her. I really resonated. She was really groovy. I mean, by that stage, we were in this rural country town. My dad had to change jobs. We had to move schools from the city, and we hated it, my twin brother and I. And my younger brother, we hated it. But there was this groovy teacher who did yoga and was vegan and read tarot cards, and like she was great. And she gave that kind of suggestion, and I think that was instrumental in giving me the courage to actually do something like that, and not go straight into university. Think about life, travel around a bit. And I got this Ravi Shankar record from the secondhand record shop when I was 17, when I'd left home. And I played this Ravi Shankar record, and I remember just weeping. Like, again, I suppose there was this feeling of recognizing something. And as I'd mentioned, there was a feeling of I'm not in my place. I'm not in my home. And there was something about this which kind of suggested home, but it also seemed so far away. And but I set some kind of resolution. I am going to go to India. And then once I was a monk, I started hearing, I think we used to get, before he'd published it as a book, we'd hear the occasional story about Ajahn Achalo and Nick Scott's adventure in India. And then a couple of terrors when I was at Nana Chat were planning a tudong in India, and they went. And I remember saying to Ajahn Jayasaro, Tanaja, a lot of these junior monks, we don't have such strong faith, and we've got a lot of doubts. And I did, I'm a faith type. I did believe that going and paying respects to the holy sites would make good karma. And I said to Ajahn Jayasaro, you should lead a pilgrimage, and you should invite some monks. And we could pay respects to the holy sites, and that would increase our merits, and that would increase our chances of staying monks for longer. And so the following year, Ajahn Jayasaro went to India, and he didn't invite me. And half the monks he took with him have since disrobed. But anyway, I asked him, why didn't you invite me? It was my suggestion. And he says, Achalo, I have no doubt in the future you will be invited to India. You will go in your own time. And so I'm being a bit of a faith type who knows something about making adhitanas. After my 5th pansa, I went on a tudong, and I walked to Patat Panom Chedi. This was a bit weird too. Most forest monks who go on tudongs try to find a quiet forest to practice in. I started walking to sacred chedis. And there's something I learned about my character when I got out of Wat Nana Chat, when you're just kind of feeling your own edges under the sky and the wind's blowing against your face, and you start to be able to make some choices and directions for your practice in that Majjhima period after 5 years. It's like, I decided to walk to Tat Panom Chedi, and I noticed that despite the fact that it was busy, my mind became peculiarly peaceful. And that's interesting. And then I went to the place in Sakon Nakhon where there are some relics of Lumpur Man. I was doing this as a kind of a puja, to him in gratitude, recognizing that my life as a bhikkhu had been much more comfortable, and in part I'd been supported because of his great practice and fame, and I wanted to honor that. And so I walked, I guess it's nearly 300 kilometers from Wat Nanachat to Tat Panom and Tat Panom to Sakon Nakhon. And then I got food poisoning, and I was going to walk all the way to Chiang Mai, and I'm like, 2 bouts of food poisoning in 3 weeks had me rethinking my plan. So I caught a bus from Sakon Nakhon to Uttaradit, taking a couple of 100 kilometers off the journey, and decided to walk along the train tracks from Uttaradit to Chiang Mai. And I made the 4 Buddha's footprints holy site my destination. And Tanajan had told me about that place when I was asking about places to go and pay respects. And walking along, I learned something about my character during that tudong. My mind was kind of, would fall into depression, seeing how many of the trees had been chopped down and seeing how much litter there was on the side of the road. And we've got these great biographies of these great monks, but it was really a different world, even though it was just a generation or 2 ago. It's largely gone. Thailand isn't like that now. And there was some kind of dejection about that. And I remember I'd asked Ajahn, well, who are these 5 Buddhas, and I'd learned that there was Kakusando, Konagamano, Kassapa Buddhas before Gautama, and that there would then be Maitreya. And I started reciting a mantra as I was walking along the train tracks. Namo Kakusando Buddha, Namo Konagamano Buddha, Namo Kassapa Buddha, Namo Gautama Buddha, Namo Maitreya Buddha. And my mind would find a happy abiding. And I was basically learning that I was a faith type that should do more samatha practices, more anusatis, and bodhisattva nusati and buddha nusati, being when I was going to the place where purportedly 4 of those Buddhists had made an imprint into a big rock and put some of their blessings there. So it was like, and then there was this long trail track, and it was this sense of, I'm going to pay respect to the Buddhas of this eon. The whole thing took on a joyful, it became a faith practice, and the mind wasn't focusing on the fact that the trees were gone and there was lots of litter. It was thinking about the Buddha's enlightenment and was happy. So when I got to that 5 Buddha's footprints, I made an aditan. Due to this merit, having paid respects to the 4 Buddha's footprints, may I be invited to pay respects to the 4 holy sites in India. And 3 days later I was. So I was a 5-pansa bhikkhu, and a Thai lady who used to work in Washington State, actually, Pullman University. And she was visiting Thailand. She had a house in Mea Rim. She'd invited me to stay there on the upper floor. And she popped in, and she'd been confused, like, what are you doing this for? What are you walking around getting sunburnt and cracked feet and blisters when you have a perfectly good monastery? Why do you do this? And I'm like, well, practicing with more difficulty causes us to develop more spiritual qualities, patient endurance, determination, and I want to do that. I want to do some of that as partly as a gesture of respect towards Lumpur Man and Lumpur Cha, and but also, you've been in the institutions for 5 years. You want to get out in the open road and feel your own edges, and just think about what you're going to do for the next few years. And so, she said, thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing it reminded me that I've always wanted to go on a pilgrimage to India, and I'd like to invite you. So I was invited to India, and I think that was early January. We didn't end up going until December. Takes a while to sort these things out. But yeah, when I was in Gaya, I remember being very frustrated because we pulled up in the train, and we had to go to this very, very nice hotel, and it was a nice pilgrimage. And I remember being extremely frustrated. I wanted to go straight to the Bodhi tree, And when I meditated under the Bodhi tree, so it was one of those whistle-stop 7-day, and in those days, it was much harder. Like we caught the train from Calcutta, there wasn't direct flights to Bodh Gaya. And the trip from Bodh Gaya to Varanasi was a 12-hour drive. It's now a 6-hour drive. And so, in a 7-day 4 holy sites pilgrimage, your memory of that is predominantly the bus. And but we had 1 day in Bodh Gaya. And so I remember just meditating under the Bodhi tree, and I can't describe it. It's just like, it's almost like you could smell, touch, taste Nibbana, enlightenment. It was just like, it just seemed closer there. And so, there was this fabulous meal that was going to be happening at this great hotel. And then people were going to be visiting the international Buddhist temples around Bodh Gaya, which would have been very interesting. And I actually said, do you mind if I skip lunch and spend the entire day here? And yeah, that experience it was probably experiencing Upajjhara Samadhi. And the thing about experiencing Upajjhara Samadhi in a place which has the blessings of an enlightened being, the quality of the rapture and the tranquility is heightened, is greater than what you would experience in your kuti or in your dwelling in your ordinary situation. So even on just that 1-day experience, there was this sense of touching something more subtle, more serene, more rapturous, and there was also a bit of frustration. I felt so close to Nibbana, but I didn't get it, And there was this sense of, but I'm definitely coming back. And so what happened was, when I was talking about this experience, we went to it was a 12-day pilgrimage, but the last 4 days were in Nepal. And so we went to Lumbini, and then we went to Pokhara, and then we went to Kathmandu, by which point I had a terrible chest infection and was bedridden. But I'd mentioned to Dr. Patria, the Thai lady who'd invited me, that I'd really like to go back to Bodh Gaya. And the people in the pilgrimage group took up a collection and helped Tananandu and myself fly back from Kathmandu to Varanasi. There were flights, and spend another month in Bodh Gaya. And as wonderful as that sounds, it was the coldest winter in 100 years, and we hadn't prepared properly. And I caught a second chest infection, and that feeling of being close to Nibbana, that didn't happen again. The Dalai Lama passed through and gave a Kala Chakra initiation, and there was just the Tibetans painted the town red, as it were, and they were a little bit obnoxious when they're in large numbers. They kind of take over, and a combination of noise, dust, pollution, excrement, sickness. It wasn't the same as the first time around, but I guess deepen my karmic affinity. And I think it was at the end of my relationship to determination. Like I said, I wasn't able to commit to 5 years off the bat. I had to approach it slowly and gently. I think I've said this in many talks. The first 6 days out of 7 in my first few years, I wanted to disrobe. And 1 day out of 7, it was more peaceful than my lay life, and I was content. And as the years went by, there were less I want to disrobe days and more contented days. And so when I got to 10 pantsas, so the way I had to approach it was, after 1 pansa, I determined 1 more pansa. After 2 pansas, I determined 1 more pansa. After 3 pansas, I determined 2 more pansas. After 5 pansas, I determined 5 more pansas. And then when I got to 10, I had to ask myself, so are you going to continue with this? And I realized that I wanted to, but I felt like I needed to make some kind of significant gesture, because at that stage I was going to commit for another 10 years. Okay, well, that's a serious commitment. And the thought came back that I should go and make that pledge in Bodh Gaya. The previous trip being 4 years before that. And so I went back, and I think I spent 7 weeks in Bodh Gaya after my 10th pansa, and made the vow to stay for another 10 years. And then think what it was being a new abbot. Oh, I mean, that's another whole conversation, but becoming an abbot, I knew it was going to be hard, and it was, I'm not exaggerating, 10 times harder than I thought. And but a building supplies company that helped me in establishing this monastery, they invited myself and a couple of other monks on a pilgrimage. And it was the first time that I realized just how good the Thai tour guides are and the Thai tour companies are. They did such a good job of taking care of all of the logistics. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I that the idea began to formulate that, oh, this might be possible if there are really skilled professional people who can take care of all of that. It might be possible for me to lead a group if I'm able to lead chanting, meditations, read from suttas, and So that was my kind of glimpse of the a kind of a higher, what's the word, upper middle pilgrimage experience, upper middle way pilgrimage experience. And so I ended up going to Australia and teaching in Australia for a period of time at the Buddhist Society of Victoria. And some people there asked me, please lead a pilgrimage. And so I did. And there was something about, I kind of felt like I was drowning in the building a monastery experience. And I think being able to go to Bodh Gaya saved me as an abbot and as a monk, actually. And it, as a practice monk, it saved me. Because, when you've got building projects and reforestation projects and retreats to teach, and there's a whole bunch of things you have to get done, and there's a whole bunch of whatever skills you have to improve and increase them, and whatever skills you don't have, you need to get them together. It's a very exhausting experience. And I found that getting on the plane and going back to Bodh Gaya, Anandagiri just disappeared in that experience. And being able to completely put it down for a month or 6 weeks at a time was just enormously helpful. And then re-establishing my meditation discipline. So I did that a couple of times, and then it occurred to me at some stage that I calculated how many hours I was doing, and it occurred to me that if I did a couple of hundred more, I'd get to 1,000 hours. And I was thinking, well, that would be good for my confidence and happiness, and that would be a good thing to remember. And so I did. I asked Pavro's permission to stay on an extra couple of weeks and meditated to the point of getting to 1,000 hours. And that's when in a, I don't know, temporary insanity, I was feeling rapturously happy, and I determined to do another 2,000 hours. 1,000 to the Buddha, 1,000 to the Dhamma, and 1,000 to the Sangha. And so then going to India actually became something I had to do. And I started doing it like twice a year to fulfill this vow. But I'm so grateful that low-cost airlines were happening by that stage, and that there was an airport in Bodh Gaya, and Bodh Gaya became simply a 3-hour flight away, a place that I went twice a year, and it became one of my homes, one of the places where I live this lifetime, because I've now been to India 18 times. And I think if you put all of my trips together, I've spent nearly 2 years there.
Ajahn, this is very, very interesting. I mean, your biography is, somewhat similar to other Westerners who come across Buddhism, in that you were highly inspired in the beginning by meditation. I mean, that's a very common thing, but a thread which goes through from your initial interest on, it sounds like, to the present day, is this aspect of intuition, having a sense, and really searching for, making determinations, resolutions, to find a home and really to stay at those homes, whether it's initially Thailand and then Nanachat, and then finding a home in these different meditation objects. You mentioned the white light, etc. Really searching for and finding a home. And this is an aspect which I think many Westerners don't find. You know, they start off with meditation and it's a very cerebral aspect of their lives, and they aren't able to tap into the intuitive aspect of their practice and aren't able to find a home. And I'm curious if you're able to give any guidance, since it seems like it's just come so naturally for you for whatever reasons. If you can give guidance to people who aren't yet able to tap into this intuitive sense and find a home in the Dhamma, in the Dharma, in Buddhism. Cup.
So I also teach people, and I guess most of my students are Asian. Maybe 70% of my students are Asian and probably of a faith proclivity. So a lot of the people who I teach share the kind of faith that I have. And, you know, long story short, I think I was an Asian that got brought into a white body, right? Mm. And I don't have any regrets about that. It's like different. You learn new things and try new things, learn new things. Mm. There's things I appreciate about Australia, but when I go to Europe, I feel like I'm walking around in a postcard, and it just feels very foreign to me. Mm. And I have spent periods of time in Amaravati, and my kind of gut intuition, I remember kind of meditating in that space with the other members of that Sangha. And I could be wrong, but I had an intuitive sense that many of the people had a strong Christian past. And as a result of very good virtue and great faith and a lot of merits and the contemplations and sincere investigation, they found Buddhist teachings and they resonated. But they didn't feel like old, deep Buddhists to me. Mm-hmm. And I guess I probably am an old, deep Buddhist. And there's the thing about Buddhist meditation, the anapanasati, it's not conceptual. It's not a contemplation. I mean, one can contemplate the breath arising and ceasing, but in terms of taking the breath as a meditation object, and that being something in the very center of experience, which allows you to put down thoughts because you're picking up the breath, put down thoughts, put down concepts, and abide in the middle of experience with something else that isn't thoughts and concepts. I think that opens up the intuition. Whereas being attached to thoughts and identifying with thoughts probably cuts it off. But like I said, I do think my childhood probably had something to do with how that. I mean, a lot of people are connected to their intuition and that kind of sense of awe for nature and the amazingness of the world when they're very young, and it gets kind of educated out of them. But I think riding around on BMX bikes on wide open roads and lying on the beaches and listening to the seas and looking at horizons and not many other people being around, I think that was a factor. The benevolence of the nature in northern New South Wales where I lived was a factor. And but I think another factor means I do know some very gifted monks who have told me some things about my past lives. So I think having been a Buddhist monk in India and having lived in Thailand are the factors in why one would feel at home in such places. But in terms of, Luang Por Chah, he actually wrote a talk, didn't he? He gave a talk to a woman who was in the later stages of death and dying, and called Our Real Home. And he was talking about that, putting things down, preparing to go to the only thing you can take with you, to clarity, awareness, presence of mind. And the only advice I can give is really disciplined meditation, a deep commitment to a disciplined meditation practice that will help a person go beyond concepts and identification with thoughts for periods of time. That's like the chinks in the armor. Just that you can experience something that isn't related to the self-view, thinking about the past and the future and opinions and right and wrong, and just awareness that can be still, see forms as forms, thoughts as thoughts, feelings as feelings, without creating a self. That's making the whole system much more porous. And I think faith as well. Faith is, I think a lot of Westerners tend to think that faith is, I have faith in the Buddha. It's kind of a concept. I've read the Four Noble Truths, and that makes sense. So I have faith in that. And of course, that's great. But compared to the sound of the Tam Wat Yen at Wat Pah Pong during the Ngans, where the 500 middle-aged and upper middle-aged ladies are chanting their evening chanting, and the faith in the hall is just like, wow. This to the bones, every pore love of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It's not I read the Four Noble Truths, they make sense. No. And maybe they need to, maybe they do, maybe they need to read it a bit more and contemplate it a bit more. But in terms of the wholehearted, surrendering, loving commitment to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha that they have in their hearts in the northeast Thailand, that generation, it's just that kind of deep as is possible commitment to something is going to make the mind oriented towards progressing on that path. And then that's going to make it receptive to intuitions about how to progress on that path, and also the subtle bodied beings who help practitioners. If a person is deeply committed to practice, some of those beings will be interested in helping you. And,
Thank you, Ajahn.
Ajahn, it's interesting to hear you. First, thank you. And speaking about how you've come to a sense of home and settledness as a monk. I remember meeting you for the first time years ago when I was a young monk, and a really distinctive sense of metta and faith, and an openness about that faith that I found rare. We're very restrained about it, even translating satta as, confidence, which there's a place for, I understand. But it strikes me that sort of home or place that you found is distinctive in two ways, at least as far as I've felt. One is the fact that it is very much a quality of love for you in a very unabashed way, as evidenced by these trips to India and your shrine. And I remember a story of you at Wat Pananachat. Maybe you can elaborate, having to go on Tudong and being told that you'd have to leave several statues behind, and being unwilling to, and just bringing them along, which I thought was great. But the other was the fact that you have a great faith in the Bodhisattva path and Bodhisattvas, if I'm correct. And I just wanted to ask about two aspects of those. One is how you do, I know several practitioners here who are struggling to kind of find a balance between these two sides of Buddhism, to put it that way, Mahayana and Theravada, Bodhisattva and Arahant paths, and how you've found a place to rest between those two. And second, in terms of embodying faith and giving expression to that, how would you suggest people make shrines? How would you, any specific advice for making and building a place of devotion?
Yeah. So I wasn't told that I wasn't allowed to take statues. I just decided I was going to take them. And so I had this little box, and I had a small statue of Mechir and a small statue of White Tara. Actually, this is something I picked up, believe it or not, in California. What seems to have been a part of my karma, that I went to live. Ajahn Achalo had been one of my teachers. I'd been his attendant as a novice in his last year in Thailand. And so I decided to spend my 4th and 5th rainy season retreats at Abhayagiri. And I guess the day I arrived, I was told that His Holiness the Dalai Lama was coming to teach in LA and that I'd already been registered to attend. So in terms of like past karma's ripening, it's like, when nobody even asked me, did you want to go? I was told, you're going. And, it's fine. On the stage, we were in the accommodations. It was the University of Southern California, and the students were on their summer vacation, and those accommodations had been made available to the monastics. And I was sharing a 2-bedroom dorm with Ajahn Sudanto. I was 3 punces. I guess he was 5, something like that. And it occurred to me, oh my God, I'm about to see the Dalai Lama this lifetime. And I felt like I haven't done any preparation. I don't feel worthy. And I went to my room and I started doing full-length prostrations in the direction of where the Dalai Lama was going to be. I'd never done a full-length prostration in my life. And I was just suddenly doing full-length prostrations in the University of Southern California dormitory. And sitting on the stage, I guess it was like 7 meters from His Holiness for about 5 days. Lumpur Pasano, Ajahn Amro, Lumpur Punadamo were there. Siddhanta, myself, Ajahn Krunlamo. And with regards to the teaching, I mean, it's a Gelugpa style. It was they go through all of these different views from different Buddhist schools, and then finally tell you at the end why then, which one's the actual one that you should have faith in. And, I'm being a bit impatient. I'm kind of like, why don't you just tell us the one that's the real one and skip the previous 4 days? And that's a terribly rude thing to say, and I ask forgiveness. But I guess the Gelugpa approach is knowing wrong views, you understanding why it's a wrong view, and then understanding why something is a right view. You don't just get it intuitively and have faith in it. You also rationally, logically, deeply understand why the correct view of emptiness is the correct view of emptiness. But there was this huge painting of White Tara above the stage. And I was just captivated. And Tupten Shodron Bhikkhuni was sitting next to us, not far away. And I said to her, His Holiness was giving a White Tara empowerment at the end of the teaching. And I'm like, excuse me, Venerable, do you have to actually take the Bodhisattva vow to get the empowerment? And she's like, yeah, I think you do. And I'm like, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure I can commit to this. And so, but I wanted Tara's blessings. I mean, there was definitely some kind of recognition with regards to White Tara. And so there's this Bodhisattva vow. Now, if you actually read it, it doesn't say I'll be a Buddha. It says, I vow to be enlightenment. I vow to attain enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. Now that can be interpreted in several ways. The first 2 verses. The third verse was, as long as beings remain, as long as space remains, until then may I too remain, dispel the miseries of the world. So I kind of folded that bit under. I'm like, no. No, I'm not doing this and as long as space remains business. But I am happy to do this. I'll attain enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. Why not? And then I remember saying to White Tara, okay, well, you just bless me to the degree that's possible with my wishy-washy commitment here. And but I did start doing the mantra, and I just resonated with it. And I felt like something that had been missing in my life. I did feel like I found it. So even living with Ajahn Achalo, who is a very metta monk, and they do certainly talk about devas and some bodhisattvas there, I didn't have this as a practice. I suppose I would call this practice devanusati if we're trying to understand it in terms of a Pali tradition context. And the Visuddhimagga says that the devanusati is appropriate for people with a strong faith proclivity. So if you don't believe they exist, there's not much point, right? But for myself, for whatever reason, I would assume past life imprints and practices. I just felt like Tara existed and wanted to do her mantra. And interestingly enough, when I went back to Bodh Gaya to make my commitment to do another 10 years after the first 10 years, I did my 1 millionth Tara mantra in front of the Tara statue in the Mahabodhi temple. And I thought that I would suddenly get into the 21 Taras, and once I'd done 1 million Tara, that this was going to go. And it was almost like, you did that, and I didn't get more deeply into Tara practices. And I'd attended His Holiness's teaching in Australia, and His Holiness gave the 1000 Amchen Rizik empowerment, and I was sitting 3 meters from him when he was visualizing the mandala. And so, perhaps not so surprisingly, I started resonating with the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, which I hadn't done before. And so I have done, I guess, 3 million Om Mani Padme Hums now. And I probably have this Tibetan practice of counting how many mantras you do. So we don't count how many Buddhas we do, right? It's 10 million Buddhas by now, or whatever. But anyway, so His Holiness passed through California a second time. I was in America for 1.5 years, and the Dalai Lama passed through twice. The second time he passed through in San Francisco area. And he gave the Medicine Buddha empowerment, and he gave a teaching on the Heart Sutra. And I resonated with that. Like, one of my favorite meditations is the sky like empty space. And it's a different list in the Pali tradition. They talk about the 4 elements, but there's another list of the 6 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water, space, and consciousness. And I don't know, there's something about adding space and consciousness makes it much more interesting. And so I like meditating on space, and Luang Por Sumedho does recommend that. It's like just as another way of making the mind less contracted and less focused on self and others and concepts of just noticing space. And so I resonated with the short version of the Heart Sutra, and I, by now, loved the Dalai Lama. So when I went back, and then I started to really miss Thailand. Like, yeah, I was grateful for the 18 months in California. And but now I had another tool. I felt I could go back now, because the forest tradition, I had experienced it as being kind of dry. Death meditation, elements meditation. And I guess the Thais culturally have more metta than we arrive at the training with. And they have more faith. But now I had this Devanusati practice. But in my experience of it is that if you have strong faith and if you do mantras diligently, it's kind of like a practice that meets you halfway. That's my experience. Like, if I sincerely do a mantra, I actually do feel some kind of blessing come after a period of time. It's not just doing the mantra. It's like one set. It's like a tuning fork in a way. And when you resonate on that vibration, then that blessing comes. And so now I now had a way. And the patriarchy and the separation from women. I mean, I grew up with sisters, and my best friends had been women, and I'd been close to women, and now I was living in this all-male community, and it was pretty macho and very critical. And now I could just secretly visualize a goddess White Tara with her beautiful, I better not say that, above my head, and she could drip nectar of the bliss of emptiness. And so it was like, I now had something else, and very helpful. And so, I by that stage knew that this was helpful for me. I'd seen it in my own mind. I was happier as a bhikkhu with this samatha practice and this extra source of blessings. And I showed Ajahn my statue of White Tara, and he picked her up and he's like, "It's a woman." He quickly put it on the table because we have very strict rules about not touching things belonging to women. And White Tara has nice breasts, right? So he was like, "Oh my God," it puts it down. And he said, "She's a bodhisattva." And he's like, no, bodhisattvas are male. Because, from the time you get the prediction of Buddhahood, a bodhisattva apparently is only born as in the male form. But the thing about the celestial bodhisattvas is they're intending to stick around a long, long, long time, so they may not have actually received their prediction of Buddhahood if they're intending to stay in the state of Mahabodhisattva for a long time. And so Ajahn actually checked her out and said, "Yeah, she's real, and she's got full barami, and she's really beautiful." And that really changed things for me, because here's my Arahant telling me that my bodhisattva is real. And so, I was going into the jungle and Tara was coming with me. And so I had a statue of Maitreya and I had a statue of White Tara. They weren't big, but they were made of copper and they were kind of heavy. And, 4 days of walking in the heat in Kanchanaburi in the hot season. So, what do? I'm thinking, I don't need my work sabong. I don't need my bathing cloth. I can request new ones when we get to the monastery. It's like, anybody want this new? Anybody want this? And I was like giving things away, but I did not give away my supply of Indian incense or my bodhisattva statues. And I guess it's just like, some of these habits, you carry them from past practices, I would assume. And I mean, like right now I'm holding a mala, right? It's just, I find that my Dharma talks are more lucid if I have beads running through my fingers. It's weird. And so how did I marry it? It's interesting, isn't it? Because it seems like I went out of my way, but it was Ajahn Pasanno that told me I was going to the Dalai Lama's teachings, It was my Theravadan teachers that got me on that stage where that empowerment was happening. So my karma mixed it all up. And and Ajahn Amro, who was the co-abbot of Abhayagiri at the time, was pretty eclectic. I mean, he had a tanka of White Tara in the office, where he and Ajahn, and there was that connection with the city of 10,000 Buddhas. When Ajahn Pasanno had an option of what he wanted to do, I can't remember what birthday it was, perhaps the 60th, and he said, "I want to go to the Buddhist Himalayas of India." So I would assume Ajahn Pasanno has some seeds in there as well. So and I think at least those of us who've been monks for several lifetimes, I think it's the case that sometimes it's Theravadan and sometimes it's Mahayana and sometimes it's Vajrayana. Some people may make very, very strong resolves. May I only be born in the Theravada and practice the true teachings of the elders and in the correct Pali. And I by now, I've been doing this for 25, 26 years, and I haven't just done the 3,000 hours of meditation in Bulgaria. I've probably done about 30,000 hours of meditation now. And so one develops some intuitions. And I think a vow I may have made in the past was not to be attached to a country or a school of Buddhism, but to actually be born in a situation where I would meet the enlightened beings of the age practicing with high standards. And so that may have manifested as a life in Nalanda, a life in Taxila, a life in Shaolin, and then Wat Pho Pho. And it makes you a bit weird that you have a bunch of eclectic practices, but to me, I don't experience confusion about them because for me it's all Buddhism. And I guess one of the reasons I love practicing in Bodh Gaya is that sense of the whole family's there. And that sense of there's some Chinese chanting. I probably did some of that in a past life. There's the lovely Sri Lankan chanting. I might have done that in a past life. There's the Thai. I'm doing that this life. And there's that just sense of the richness of these practices. And if you see it as samatha and vipassana, if you see it as that, and if my understanding of the difference between the Arahant path and the Bodhisattva path is they're extremely similar. The only issue is you're willing to do it much longer. So one still cultivates mindfulness and clear comprehension. One is still practicing for samadhi and insight, but it's going to ripen differently. But and with the Bodhisattva practitioner, there's going to have to be more of an emphasis on the 4 Brahmaviharas to make it sustainable. But I just look at it myself in terms of what is a samatha practice, what is a contemplative practice, what is a wisdom contemplation, and yeah, I guess I'm on the one. Monk once asked me when we were in Daodam if I was because they used to have nicknames for that's the jungle area of retreat. They used to have nicknames for the various ways up the mountain. There was kind of I think there was Sotapanna, and then there was Sotapanna, which was steep and fast, and then there was the Bodhisattva, which was long and winding and longer. And somebody asked me which path I was on, and I said, I'm on the scenic route.
Ajahn, speaking of scenic, would you, because your shrine's a pretty beautiful, I've seen your shrine, and it's not necessarily exactly like the one behind you at the moment, but it's a almost perfect embodiment of the balance and the sort of wealth of faith you've just spoken to. Do you have any practical tips on how people can increase that faith grounded in love with these sort of props, to put it, in Ajahn Longpa language?
Yeah,
the props are important, and so
yeah.
how would you recommend people approach a place of devotion and building one?
So, what to think about what you love. So, what is it that you love about the Buddha? If you're looking for a Buddha image, let's start with the Buddha. What qualities of the Buddha would you say you really love? And then when you're looking at images, which image captures that? So when I'm going to, don't just go to a store and don't just go to Kmart and get a plastic Buddha for $20, right? I'm like, gosh, the oceans I would swim across to get the perfect Buddha statue. You have no idea. I'm probably not the most balanced. Yeah. You don't need to take it to the extreme that I have. But yeah, you can't see it, but there's another shrine over there, and then there's the one in my. It's the one in the room that I actually meditate in.
You can't give us a tour right now, can you, Ajahn?
No, I won't do that. I'm not going to out myself in public to that degree. So what is it? Is it the purity? Is it the metta? Is it the wisdom? Really good Buddhist art, by the way, a really, really good Buddha statue will have a quality of purity, aloofness, and kindness all at once. And but not everybody. So there are different types of intelligence, and I'm probably the kind of classic, what they would call the visual intelligence type. So, and I remember talking with Ajahn Achalo and Ajahn Sripanyu, and they both admit that for the life of them, they can't visualize anything. And they're experts at language, which is interesting. So to this day, I'm turning 50 in about a week. I don't know actually where to put commas or full stops, right? I can write books, but I don't know where you put commas and full stops. I put them where I feel like they should go. And my editors tell me that it's wrong. And but that's what editors are for, right? So there are people. Different people have different types of minds, and like Ajahn Achalo was telling me that if he looks at something and he goes away, like if he looks at the color of the wall in my Dhamma hall, he might like it, but unless he makes a mental note and calls it, that's a yellowy beige, he won't be able to remember what color it is. But if he looks at it and goes yellowy beige, when he goes back to his kuti, he can say, yeah, that yellowy beige on the wall is quite nice. And I will, without having thought any words, I will remember colors and textures a long time later. And he's like, yeah. So visual, I recently built a chedi in my monastery and I designed it myself. It only took 2 hours. I haven't studied graphic design or architecture. And I built this kuti, and I actually laid the bricks, 108 bricks a day for 3 months, chanting Itipiso with each brick. And I did the engineering and architecture, and I didn't study those things. But yeah, I can't speak Spanish and Italian and Russian like Thierry Pugno. People have different types of minds, and I'm never going to be a Pali expert. So I can chant plenty of Pali, but probably not perfectly correctly. And yeah. So I guess it's thinking about what qualities do you love, and then trying to find an image that will help you remember that. And then with regards to the bodhisattvas, if a person wants to do some devanusatya, if they want to broaden their repertoire of possible samatha practices, the most Theravadins can at least embrace the future enlightenment of Maitreya. And so is there a painting of Maitreya or a statue of Maitreya that you resonate with? Can you put that on your shrine? And then it's a matter of, well, what are you going to ask yourself? Do you love the Buddha? And if you don't, if you respect him, but you're not sure if you love him yet. I remember the first few years, one monk asked me, he kind of challenged me, probably had some, as many people do, self-aversion, self-loathing issues. One monk asked me, if the Buddha was next door, would you go and pay respects to him? And I'm like, no. Now that's very interesting. I'm a Buddhist monk, and if the Buddha was next door, I wouldn't go and pay respects to him. And then I'm like, well, why? I think it was about 3 pansas. And it's like not feeling worthy and feeling worried that the Buddha would be ashamed of me. Because, in the Vinaya text, we study every rule in the Vinaya, and the Buddha is like, you foolish man. It's like, oh dear. And so there's that sense of, I'd be paying respect to the Buddha, and the Buddha be looking at me and saying, you foolish man. I'm like, yeah, he can come across as kind of stern. And yeah, that's interesting. I guess not many Theravadins. One of the reasons I loved White Tara was that sense of, here's a being that's going to hang around as long as it takes in samsara until I get it together. It's less judgmental, isn't it? It appears less judgmental. It appears very patient and benevolent. And whereas like the Buddha, he's already done it and he's already left the place, and he's like saying, foolish man, foolish man. Obviously he didn't just say that. He said many, many wonderful things. And but for a period of years, I loved the Bodhisattvas more than I loved the Buddha. And it's probably not the case for everybody. And there is that sense of they're committed to sticking around to help me no matter how long it takes, no matter how much of a bicycle accident I am. And they're going to keep sticking around until I get it together. And I think it was my practice in Bodh Gaya that really made me get that the Buddha has the same metta and the same compassion as a bodhisattva. He was the bodhisattva before he was the Buddha. And he has as much metta and compassion as the bodhisattvas. And then obviously he would relate in the most skillful way to the person before him. Mm-hmm. And if that was tenderness or gentleness, that's the way he would have been. And now I love the Buddha and the bodhisattvas equally, I'm happy to say. And yeah, it's just true. Like there is a statue of Avalokiteshvara Kuan Yin right here, right? And then there's a bodhisattva image in terracotta on my wall. And then there's Lumpur Cha. And then there's the Buddha. And that's just Buddhism for me. Like, Buddhism for me has Buddhas, Arahants, and Bodhisattvas. That's just the way it is. And I guess for other people, they don't think about the Bodhisattvas much. And but it's, in terms of like, one can get depressed about the fact that Buddhism seems to be degenerating and the number of enlightened beings are less. But if you allow into the picture that there are millions of beings established in enlightenment in the heaven realms right now, even as I'm speaking, then Buddhism isn't dying. And it's like millions of people have been established in paths and fruits and are enjoying that and are in heaven realms now on one of their final births before Nibbana. And beings who have predictions of Buddhahood are also around, many of them. Buddhism just becomes a much more, the team is bigger, and you've got more forces of goodness that you can recollect and gladden your mind, and you've got more people cheering for you as well.
Ajahn,
And I guess another thing I would do is like, what is it that you love? Like, what incense do you like? What fragrance do you like? What flower do you like? Like, whatever it is that you like, that if you think about, do I love the Buddha? No, I don't love him yet. Do you respect him? Yeah, I respect him. What do you respect? You kind of just get a bit clearer about it. I respect him for this. Are you grateful? If you're not grateful, we need to do some thinking there. Like, for Asankhya and 100,000 eons laying the conditions, I'm grateful. Like, if I think about it and really what the implications of that are, I can get weepy with loving gratitude in a couple of minutes if I want to. And so one thinks about that to the point where one is actually grateful, understanding that gratitude is a pleasant emotion, to really feel grateful. And then one asks oneself, how can I express my gratitude? And then one can take the step of, well, what's my favorite flower? I'm going to offer my favorite flower to the Buddha once a week. What is my favorite fragrance? I'll offer this. I'll rub a little bit of this on the Buddha statue when I do my Tamat Chow, my morning or evening chanting, whatever it is. You can begin a kind of a devotional practice with offering the things that you do, either out of respect or gratitude or love, or hopefully all of them.
I listened to Ajahn Jayasara recently speak about how Longpo Cha told him that if he really understood bowing, he would bow with tears in his eyes every time. So
Right.
thank you for bringing all that up again, Ajahn.
That too.
Yeah, Ajahn, it's morning in our California, the West Coast, and I think we're going to eat fairly soon. But we're so grateful to have your voice, have your perspective, your experience, and which is so unique. And I think really a perspective which is heard too infrequently in American Dhamma circles and Western Dhamma circles, really bringing beauty and love and devotion and the heartfulness into practice is something which I think people could really use. And we're very, very appreciative, and hearing you talk about the power and the necessity of gratitude really makes sense and rings true. And hopefully at some point we can do another interview, because this is obviously, there's so much more that we could ask. So thank you so much, Ajahn, and
it's my pleasure.
Hopefully.
I guess, if people tell you you're unique or this is unusual, and I live and breathe my life, obviously, so I don't walk around feeling like I'm unique or unusual. But I do recognize that, when I suppose, living in Thailand, and Thailand is 50 million Buddhists in Thailand. So you're going to have a lot of different types of Buddhists. And also other Buddhist countries are regional for me. So having spent periods of time in the sacred chetties of Sri Lanka, having spent some time at Kuan Yin Island in China, I've seen large numbers of beings expressing deep loving devotion in various ways. And so I'm kind of, when I look at that, I'm normal. And probably look at Western Buddhists and think they're a bit weird.
Yeah.
Certainly a lot of us are imbalanced.
It's the water that we swim in, isn't it? It's like It's the water that we swim in. And we all, the faith types and the devotional types, we all need to strive for balance, don't we? Mm. So if my love for Buddhist art becomes obsessive and I neglect the formal practice as well, then that's not a balanced practice. But if I can help co-create Buddhist art and make a beautiful shrine that helps people feel uplifted and do my morning, afternoon, and evening meditation, well, then it's probably okay. Mm. And then when I do these question and answer sessions, I really enjoy them because it's different to preparing a talk, right? You never know what's going to be asked. And it makes you remember the things that you've learned and been taught by your teachers. And so, yes, I'm also striving for balance.
I think you provide an important counterbalance to a lot of the secular dryness over here that you encounter. And thank you, Ajahn, and for gifting that to us. So,
yeah, we need bigger Buddha statues, I think.
Yes. So. We'll work up to one like you have, Ajahn.
Yeah. You should see the one I've just put in our new sala for the eating hall. Mm. This is 1.30 meters. The new one's 2.80 meters. So.
That'll do it. We have to
Lovely
go
to spend time with you. I want you to go and eat your meal. Please, bon appetit.
Thank you so much, Ajahn.